And so the problem is that when they start offloading the work, they're actually having to offload that behavior onto that person as well. And generally, good contractors and employees don't get a dopamine hit from that. That's not actually positive for them. What it is it creates burnout
Okay.
when they're pushed against a deadline. We always assume burnout is about working too many hours, but it's not about working too many hours. It's about not enjoying our work. It's about not actually getting satisfaction out of our work.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. Your team says everything's fine, but midnight emails tell a different story. Learn how to spot the warning signs of burnout before you lose your best people. Hey there, I am Tonya Kubo, and I am joined by my very favorite business operations expert, Gwen Bortner. And today, Gwen, we're going to put you a bit in the driver's seat because this is a conversation I feel like you have to set up for us. Because while I have way too much experience on the topic, mine comes from the perspective of being a burned out staffer, the one who goes through great personal and sometimes professional sacrifice to get the job done on time, under budget, no matter what, no exceptions. And you, on the other hand, have significant experience with the CEO perspective on the topic. And since the whole point of this show is to support women entrepreneurs in building sustainable success in their businesses, I think you get to take the lead here. So why don't you kick us off?
There's an interesting problem as a CEO starts to transition out of solopreneurship, and particularly as they're adding a number of people, either as subcontractors or as employees. Not as big of a deal when it's really early stage and maybe they're doing 1 or 2 hours a week. Usually not, that's usually not the issue. It's when we're actually getting to putting in significant hours in a week, because everybody's capacity for what they believe they can do and how much time it actually takes, very few people can actually line those two things up accurately. It's like, oh, it'll only take me, 5 minutes to answer this email. And then you look up and it's been 45 minutes because you thought about this thing. And then you go, oh, I better research this. And also on the opposite side of, oh, this is going to take me 3 hours to do. And then when you actually sit down to do it, it's like, oh, well, that took like 30 minutes. So it's not one way, it's both ways, right? Being able to align those two things is really, really hard. And the only time that you get really good at it, and when I say good, I don't mean like precise, but I mean, relatively accurate, is when you're constantly looking at it on an ongoing basis and you're really paying attention to not only how long did it take, but beforehand thinking, how long do I think this is going to take? Right? So it's not just oh yeah, I look and I see this took me 2 hours, but that it's beforehand saying, yeah, this should take me about 2 hours. It's like, it took me about 2 hours. Good. Paying attention to that over time. The problem with the solopreneur is, first, they don't ever track their time. Right? Because all of the jobs are theirs. All of the time is theirs. All of the is theirs. And so they don't have really great instinct for how long things take. The other problem is often the nature of being an entrepreneur is they're really good at a number of things at a level that is so far beyond what should be expected from most people. But because it also is so intuitive, natural, gifted kinds of skills, they also don't realize how far off the mark they are. It's like grading on the curve. I don't think they ever do that anymore, and I'm so old, maybe everyone's like, "I have no idea what you're even talking about." But back in the day, sometimes colleges, particularly universities, would grade on the curve. And so if everybody did really, really bad, there was still a percentage that got A's, a percentage that got B's, a percentage that got C's. And it actually meant that everybody got some amount of grade. So that was good if everyone was doing really bad. It was not good if everyone was doing really well. So if everyone actually was doing 90% or better on all of their tests and their scores on the curve, someone, the person who had just like 89%, probably failed the class because someone also had to fail, right? And so this is that whole grading on the curve concept. And when you're the person that's clear up at the top end where everybody else is in the middle, but you think you're in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like everybody else is really, really failing, or you expect them to be able to do better, or all of these things. And like I said, when you're just doing it on your own, it's hard to see that, right? Because back to, it's intuitive, it makes sense. Why there's no reason this should take that long, because it's never taken that long for you. Like you just can't even imagine. Um, and so that's the place that this starts, because as you start bringing on people, you expect that they can perform at your same rate.
Mm.
Okay. And when I'm talking rate in this case, I'm really talking about speed. Takes me an hour, should take you an hour. Now, the other side of it is sometimes it's like, well, I'm going to give you an hour for this. And like 10 minutes in, they're like, I'm done. Why do I need an hour? I'm done in 10 minutes. Because it's your other half of the thing that takes you really, really long to do. Right. And so when we start doing that, the problem is we expect so much on that front end of the things that are really natural, easy, expect for us. And most of the people we hire are not prepared to, for lack of a better term, talk back to us and say, "Are you crazy? There is no way I could get this done in this amount of time." Right? Because that's just kind of rude and not appropriate in most cases. Disbalance starts happening. And part of that disbalance, the other half of it that becomes the bigger problem, is the entrepreneur is used to making things fit wherever they want them to fit. Okay.
Okay.
So today, my husband is gone for the weekend. And so therefore, I'm going to work late on Friday. And you know that in your head. And so you've compensated to all your work to say, I'm working late on Friday. That's fine when it's just you, because maybe it affects the dog, possibly if you've got children, but it's not, it's all yours, right? But the problem is when you started setting up those behaviors, what you're now doing when you're having to give anything to anybody else, it's like, oh yeah, I need that done on Monday, but you don't actually get them the information they need until 8 o'clock on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And for you, it was fine because, it's only 30 minutes. Well, yeah, it's only 30 minutes, but there aren't any official minutes between now and Monday morning.
Right.
So now you're requiring them to work in what I would, in traditional terms would be overtime hours, which of course they don't get paid for, most likely, depending on, what their relationship is. And this is where the burnout starts to happen, because you don't even think about it, because it was like, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's only 30 minutes. And it may really only be 30 minutes. But now it's about, when are you asking for that 30 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
Is it during the 30 minutes that they actually had allocated for you? Well, no, the fact was they had already allocated 10 hours for you this week. They have already worked 10 hours. And now you're wanting to put 30 more minutes in there.
Yeah. Okay. So let me back up from this, because this is interesting. And as always, you gave us like 10 key points
Of course,
in
sorry.
like just a fraction of time. So I think what I heard is, and jump in to correct me if I'm misrepresenting anything. So let's just start with assuming everybody has good intentions. I think that's important, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is, I mean, obviously there's people who are ridiculous, but
Well, and the point
most people
is,
have good, yeah, but most people actually have good intentions. Yes.
yes, and I think the point is, though, is there is bound to be a listener or 50 who have worked for people who did not, right? Who were true ogres. Like, I think we all have at least one bad boss in our history. And so I want to start us from that shared understanding that the CEO has the best of intentions. The staff members all have the best of intentions. They want to do good work. The CEO wants to be a good boss or vendor, depending on how the arrangement is. And everybody can still want to do A work for everyone involved. And that still doesn't mean that the CEO isn't doing things, likely unintentionally, that is going to burn out their team without even realizing it. And what you pointed to, and I think this is very valuable, which is why I want to bring it up, is a lot of it has to do because the CEO is doing their job. And when they are a solopreneur and they're doing all the things, they're wearing all the hats, they're they're maybe switching tasks 8 times in an hour, going back and forth, not even realizing it, handling some personal stuff, some professional stuff, weaving it all in. And they don't even know the lines are blurred because initially it's all one job. This is what it takes to run a business. Then they get so big that they can no longer solely run the business and they have to portion pieces off. And while they might be able to portion off tasks, they aren't naturally thinking of all the steps in advance of the task and how much time those steps take, not to mention how many years it took them to do the thing in the amount of time that they do it. And so because of that, they don't realize maybe how much they're handing off and what is reasonable to expect. Meanwhile, they have hired contractors who in many cases also have bad bosses in their history. And those
Most
of
likely.
us, right, and those of us who come from corporate environments, come from environments where you didn't get to say no to the boss.
Right.
And so even when we're in contractor arrangements, we don't realize we can say no to the CEO. So what I really heard you talk about is the CEO is handing stuff off, not recognizing the impact of what they're handing off. And the staff member is taking things, not realizing that it's on them to say, whoa, 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 I'm at my limit. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. And as a part of that, and I really appreciate you setting that baseline that I think everybody has good intentions. The additional piece of it, particularly early on in the relationship as employee, contractor, whatever thing, is we want to make a good first impression, which actually compounds the issue because we typically will say things to ourselves as the person receiving the work. Well, yeah, it's going to take me longer, but I'm not going to charge for it. I'm not going to, own it because I know that this is me, all of those things. And what that's doing is it's setting that up as the standard. And so at the point that the person wants to push back, often it's so far in, it's like, but it's always only taken you 2 hours. No, it's always actually taken me 4 hours, but I've never charged you for it. But I've done everything in my business plan based on it taking you 2 hours. And now it's taking you 4, which is costing me twice as much. And now I can't make any money on this thing that you tell me I haven't actually been able to make any money on from the beginning, but there was no way for me to know that. And so now, from the CEO perspective, it's like, you're totally screwing my business.
Right.
Right. But it was because back to good intentions, right? We were trying to do the right thing and, owning. And of course, early on, there always is a little bit of a learning curve. We can accept that. Right. But what often really is the case using this kind of example is the business owner said it should take 2 hours because it takes them 2 hours.
Right.
And contractor, employees, person could be doing it for 5 more years and it's always going to take them 4 hours because they are not the owner, CEO. that has some, natural gifts, whatever
Right.
whatever they are, right? Um, and not that the person is inadequate for the job, because that's not all what I'm saying. It's the other is so outstanding, they don't understand that, normal or good is actually 4 hours. And 2 hours is
Right.
just freaking ridiculous, right? It's the unicorn pace.
Right. Right. Okay. And like, I think a practical example there would even be when you talked about email. So, I am somebody who can write a 2,000 word article with sources in probably hour and a half. May not be perfect.
10
It may need
hours.
editing.
Hello. 10 hours. That would take me 10 hours.
Right. But I could do an hour and a half. Like I said, it would have to be proofed. It would just be a rough draft. You would take 10 hours. Meanwhile, for me to write an email that is compassionate, direct, to the point, for a specific purpose, right? Not just to get to know you. I'll spend an hour on that. I will spend an hour on an email with a vendor to talk about some like hiccups in our processes, because I don't want to be offensive and I want to do this and I'm overthinking all the things. But I also recognize that the written word doesn't have tone. So I'm super careful. You, on the other hand, I have watched write emails that are twice as effective in communicating the message in less than 10 minutes.
Same activity from
Right.
a technical standpoint,
Mhm.
right? But completely different skill, and it's part of the way our brain works.
Exactly. So with that in mind, I want to get to, I think, what the heart of the matter is, which is, what do CEOs get wrong when they're thinking about team capacity?
Here's the first problem. The first problem is they assume that if it's getting done, it must be okay. Meaning that the team is not, if it's getting done, the team must not be burning out, which is a giant assumptive leap that shouldn't be there. Because just because it's getting done doesn't mean that there's not lots of gnashing of teeth, stress, or other things happening in the background. So that's the first problem. Just because it's getting done doesn't mean it's okay. The other is entrepreneurs. I think we've talked about this before in previous episodes. Dan Sullivan, who owns Strategic Coach, he's been doing coaching of coaches for 35 plus years. I think this is their 35th anniversary this year. Has this great saying that entrepreneurs love putting out fires and they're really good at it. And therefore, they are also often arsonists.
Arsonists, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And I probably butchered the saying, but it's close. It's close. It's close to the right, the actual quote. And that's the piece that I think the CEO doesn't pay attention to, is that they actually get a really big dopamine hit for swooping in and saving the day, whatever that looks like. Whether it's getting that email out at the last minute, whether it's solving this problem, whether it's working extra hours, because that's actually their own version of addiction, right? I just much rather work for 12 hours today. so working. I mean, there's all sorts of things that it can manifest as. And so the problem is that when they start offloading the work, they're actually having to offload that behavior onto that person as well. And generally, good contractors and employees don't get a dopamine hit from that. That's not actually positive for them. What it is it creates burnout.
Okay.
When they're pushed against a deadline. One of our clients said today, I realize that I'm always asked to do things at the very last minute. And she's a newer employee working with the CEO, and says, and I can always get it done, but I don't feel like I do my best work. Now, she's not thinking she's heading toward burnout. Part of it because she's young and she hasn't been having to do this for a really long time yet. But that screams burnout to me, because although she's getting the work done and it's an adequate job, no one's complaining about the work, she's feeling like she's not doing a good job. Because instead of having 3 days to do a project, she's only getting 1 day, which means she can't do it in a day, let it sit for a day, proof it, make sure there's no mistakes. Cause that's one of the things she's like, I know occasionally things go out with mistakes and that really, really bothers me. Those type of things are actually the subtle things that cause burnout. We always assume burnout is about working too many hours, but it's not about working too many hours. It's about not enjoying our work. It's about not actually getting satisfaction out of our work.
I would not define it that way. So I'm glad you did. So,
I mean, the other will play into that, but that's also
yeah,
part of why you're not getting satisfaction out of the work.
right. Because if the work is satisfying, then chances are you feel good about it. And if you feel good about it, then it's not depleting. And then it, kind of falls along that path, which makes sense. So I thought you were going to bring up something else. So I'll bring it up, which is one of the things I see oftentimes in terms of capacity is I see that a lot of business owners assume that bodies equals capacity. And that's not always true. Like, I have met a lot of business owners who like to throw people at their problems. And what I mean by that is, overworked, stress. Okay, hire another person, hire another person. And so then in their mind is, well, we were doing all of this with 2 people a year ago. Now we're doing all of this with 6 people. We've got to be doing fine. Like people can't be burned out because we have 6 people.
Well, and I think that goes back to the definition I just gave.
Mm-hmm.
Is because it actually isn't about time capacity.
Mm-hmm.
It's about satisfaction with work capacity, right? And so another reason people get burned out is when there is someone on a team who is pulling the team down emotionally, right? They're grumpy all the time. They're not helpful. They're all of those things. Well, that has actually nothing to do with time.
Yeah.
It has to do with energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you could add 10 more people to the team, but everyone would still be getting burned out.
Right. Because that person's such an energy drain.
Yep.
Okay, so we've talked about a couple of misconceptions about team capacity. You didn't say this explicitly, so I'll say it. So one big one is your capacity and my capacity do not look the same. Like, what you can do and enjoy doing in 10 hours is going to be different from me, even if our roles are the same. Also, people doesn't necessarily equal capacity. And sometimes capacity isn't about what you can get done, but it's about how good you feel about the finished product. And all of this, when mistakenly appropriated, if I can use more jargon on this, possibly, I'm sure I could, leads to burnout. Let's back up from that. Let's assume that I am a really, really good person, Gwen. I love my people. I don't want my people to be burned out. In fact, if you were to tell me my people were burned out, I would be grossly offended, because if they were burnt out, they should have told me. In fact, I have a personal example of this, but what I want to get to are the warning signs of burnout. And I left a company burnt to a crisp. And during my exit interview, the CEO said, "What's going on? Like, you were doing this, you were doing that. We gave you a raise. We did this, we did that. Like, what happened?" And I was so burned out that I was quite direct. And I said, "You know what? I've been thinking," because it was along the lines of, what could we have done to keep you? Is there anything we could have done? I said, I ran through every scenario on how to keep me, like double my salary, this and that. But the fact is I was working so many hours to fulfill all the promises you were making that if you had even tripled my salary, I would have had no time to spend the money. And then their follow-up statement, which was a request, which was like, "Well, I really hope we can work together again. But can you make me this promise that if we ever work together again, you'll give me a heads up before you get this burned out?" And I was like, "Sure," because at the time I was like, "I'm never working with you again." But I remember leaving that call thinking, how interesting that you think I saw this train coming and just chose not to say anything.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest issue with burnout, because for most people, I mean, there's some people that are super, super self-aware. But I would say, 85 to 90% of us, and notice I used us because I definitely think I'm in the same capacity, don't see the burnout till we're way, way into it. We don't see the early signs of it. Now, where I think the piece that I use to manage it, and I'll just say this is me, I'm not sure if it's really true for everyone, but we talk about this quite a bit, is I think having really clear understanding what your boundaries are and why they're there and how you're using them and holding them consistently, I think makes a huge difference,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if you know what your boundaries are and you set your boundaries and you're clear about your boundaries, then it's really easy to identify when someone has crossed that boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At that point, then it's actually pretty easy to talk about at that moment in time. And so, using the very early example of, hey, I'm working late on Friday and this is only going to take you 30 minutes, but I want it first thing Monday morning, right? Kind of a thing. If you're really clear that you don't work on the weekends,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then the first email I get from you on Monday morning is, I just saw this because, as you know, I don't work on the weekends. And although I know that you need this first thing, I already have 4 hours of work booked. And so I will be able to get it to you by 2 o'clock, but I will not be able to get this to you first thing in the morning. If that's going to be a problem, either you will need to do this, and I would like to talk to you about this, but so this doesn't happen again in the future. That feels like a really hard conversation, but most people actually don't know that they've done all the things that I just said in that statement unless you actually say it to them.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great example, and I love the fact that you kind of gave us a script even for establishing our own boundaries to prevent burnout in ourselves. But what would you like? How would you advise a CEO to recognize burnout in their people, realizing that a lot of people don't come from a background where they feel like they can say those sorts of things to a CEO? So it's kind of on the CEO's shoulders to look at their team and see when they're heading toward a bad path.
It's listening for the tiny clues, I think.
All
And the
right, give them
tiny,
to me.
like a tiny clue would be, I could have done a better job if. I wish I had more time. When your person who really does a good job is apologizing, that means that they don't think they've done the quality of work that the job deserves.
Okay.
I'm sorry that. you know, I think any of those things are some of the first things. And if you start getting curious about those and dig into them and say, why don't you think this is a good job? Well, because I only had a day and I really like to have 3 days. That's something that's like, oh, I'm not giving them enough time. That's actually creating burnout. Now, you can't ask them if they're getting burned out because back to most of them won't even know that they
Right.
are. Right. So you have to be asking, like, so why is that a problem question, and work your way back and say, oh yeah, this is a behavior that works for me but doesn't work for my people, and start making your own adjustments to that, and
Yeah.
understanding it's like, oh yeah. So as soon as anyone is saying, like I said, I think all of the apology kind of things, I wish I could have done a better job, I'm sorry that, especially when you feel like the work was good,
Mm-hmm.
that means there's something on their side that's making the work not feel satisfying.
Yeah, and sometimes it may just be simply a conversation about expectations, right? To be able to
Well,
say, like,
right,
actually, this is A plus plus work to me.
right,
So spending 3 days on it may not have actually made sense. And then you can
right.
have that sort of conversation, right? But still, I like that you're offering some signs because I think most of us just don't know how to recognize these things in other people. And because while self awareness is a big thing, right, it's extra hard to be aware of other people's cues. I know for me, one of the things I look for when I'm working with a team to assess burnout is if somebody starts complaining about something that they've never complained about before.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. I love that.
That tells me it's like, okay, they had a long fuse and it's just about burned up. And the thing that they're complaining about is the thing that burned it up, most likely.
Most
And,
likely, yeah,
and
yeah.
then
Or
figuring that
related,
out.
yeah.
Yeah, or somehow related. So we've got some signs to recognize impending burnout. We've got some great modeling of how to assert boundaries to people you work with. Is there a way, and I know you're not going to give me a formula, Gwen, you never do. I always want one, but you never give me one. But do you have a way of maybe how, as a CEO, you could measure team capacity? Like, is there a way to know on the front end before they're overextended?
I think it's just being aware. I think it's hard to measure capacity, but part of it is helping them become aware of what their capacity is, which we talked about at the beginning, of asking questions like, how long should this take? And then afterwards saying, how long did it take? Because a lot of times burnout is happening on the other side, because in their mind, this should take 2 hours. And the problem is it always takes 2.5 hours. Right? But as long as no one's saying, how long do you think it should take? And how long did it take? And making them actually pay attention to it, they're going to continue to allocate 2 hours to do this thing. And so in an 8-hour day, they can do 4 of them, which takes 10 hours. Now they're mad at you because they're working way more than they're supposed to be allocated for. Well, no, that's not actually true. You're doing that because you said it's going to take 2. So I said, great, you can get 4 done today. I'm going to assign you 4. But what the reality is, no, you can get 3 done today. But as long as you keep telling me it's going to take 2 hours, I'm going to keep assuming it takes 2 hours. Helping them be aware, because very few people are highly conscious about time. And like I said, it goes both ways. It's the other side of like, I can only get 4 done in a day. And it's like, it's not even lunchtime yet and you've got all 4 done.
Right.
So that's not right. Right. It's both sides of the equation. The more that we pay attention to how long we think it takes and how long it does take, the other thing that allows us to know is like, hey, this is out of normal. Right. And then you can start saying, well, why is this out of normal? Well, maybe it's out of normal because I've had a lot going on in my life and I'm really stressed out, and and that's why it's out of normal. But maybe it's out of normal because there's something unique about this, and maybe we need to pay attention to that. And maybe this is the new normal. And it's about helping people be very conscientious about how they're using their time. And I'm not saying, make them keep track of every little single solitary thing all the time. But, even we did a task study just recently, and there were a couple insights that each one of us had from that task study that without actually kind of really looking at the details, we would have never seen.
No, that is very true. And I'm curious, back to the topic of every CEO wants to be a good boss. Nobody wants to be a tyrant. Do you have any advice for creating a sustainable workload standards? Like, how do you let people know, maybe not necessarily on the front end because you can't know what you don't know, but how do you let them know, like, okay, these are the standards, and also these are the standards that are sustainable?
I think it's about having all of these conversations on an ongoing basis and being really aware of it so that it becomes part of the culture of conversation within the organization. So that if anyone is starting to feel like something's off, it's not like, well, I don't dare say something because they'll think I'm a slacker. It's like, no, that's part of what I'm supposed to do, is to say something weird's happening here. This is taking way longer than I thought, or it's taking way more energy, or someone's not delivering in the time frame that they're supposed to, which pushes my time frame back, which stresses me out. I mean, there's all sorts of pieces there. As the CEO, the piece that I think you have to be most aware of is, how often are you coming in and putting out the fire? If you're coming in and putting out the fire very often, whether you know it or not, you are totally stressing out your employees. Because if you're having to come in and put out the fire, that means things are not being able to be done in a consistent, manageable, ongoing way. Now, every once in a while, we may have to put out a fire, but I'm like, if that's happening pretty regularly, like once a week, twice a week, every day, that's a sign that you're actually working your people beyond capacity.
Okay.
This is where you've got to realize that you are being a freaking arsonist. Stop it. It really is. Sometimes it's about realizing that the things that are just so intuitive to you, you're not paying any attention to. Sometimes it's realizing that, oh yeah, I put these things this way so I know that it will blow up so I can put out the fire.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not necessarily setting the fire, but I was actually using this with a client earlier today. But what you're doing is you're like, huh, I see smoke. Look at that. Look at that smoke over there. Huh. Yep, hasn't broken into flame yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I see smoke. Is it a fire? Oh, I see. No, that was just a lick. Oh, now it's burning down the entire forest. Now I'm excited.
Yeah. Now I got my dopamine hit.
Right? But as soon as you saw smoke, you should have addressed it. I'm watching a lot of entrepreneurial clients that I have see smoke and they don't really want to address it because it's like, well, it's only smoke. It's not really a thing.
Yeah.
It's like, it may not become fire. Uh-huh. It's because solving the fire is way more exciting.
Okay. We're going to have to stop there. I could seriously dig in for 40 more minutes, hands down. This is a big topic. It's going to be one that we're going to have to revisit again. But, just to kind of wrap a bow around it all, I think what we're really talking about is that as a CEO, it is your job to proactively manage the capacity of your business. Whether you're a solopreneur, you need to proactively manage your own capacity. If you've got a team, you have to proactively manage their capacity. Why, yes, it is on them to let you know when they're feeling stretched thin. You have to also recognize not everybody recognizes that for themselves, nor are they comfortable coming to the table. So as the CEO, you got to really put your CEO pants on and observe it, ask the questions, have the hard conversations early, often as frequently as necessary, so that you aren't becoming an arsonist and fully responsible for all the fires that you're setting. Gwen, thank you so much for all of this. I feel like you have dropped so many nuggets with us that this is going to be a really good, juicy episode. And I just, want to remind everybody, we're really talking about building sustainable team workloads because that's how you build the business you really want. Nobody wants a business that burns anybody out. And, with that in mind, if you want a weekly nudge toward building the business you really want, we have a really cool new thing that is available, and it is called Insight to Impact, which is a premium newsletter where Gwen, you'd like to think that I'm like the brains behind the operation. I am not. It is all Gwen, where Gwen poses one thoughtfully crafted question each Friday. And then the best part is if you take the time to respond, we personally will reply to you with focused insights to help you implement positive changes in your business. You can get the details at everydayeffectiveness.com/impact. Gwen, thank you so much for being here. Listener, thanks for paying attention all the way to the end. We will see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.